Hello everyone, welcome to yet another episode of India Ratings and Research Expert Lounge podcast. India Ratings and Research has published a special report on residential real estate entities. Today I have with me Mr. Mahaveer Jain, who is the director at India Ratings and Research, and Kanchi Sodani, analyst at India Ratings and Research. I request Mr. Mahaveer to begin the discussion for the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Amay. Good morning, Kanchi.
Good morning, Mahaveer. Good morning, Amay.
Yeah, now let's get started on this podcast. The first question that I have for you is, can you provide insights on the special report that we've published on residential real estate?
Right. So, Mahaveer, India Ratings and Research applies its corporate rating methodology and parent and subsidiary rating linkage criteria for rating issuers across sectors, which also includes the residential real estate sector. However, when it comes to the residential real estate sector specifically, there's an added dimension of the analysis to be considered due to the RERA restrictions which are placed on the cash flow fungibility. And what further adds to the complexity is that the projects are executed in separate SPVs. And hence, typically, the real estate entity would end up having a complex group structure, and therefore, the rating approach may not necessarily be standardized or straightforward, but it would rather be a more nuanced approach. Hence, we went ahead with a special report.
Okay. Can you elaborate on the group complexity and its implications on the rating approach?
Yes. So, what generally happens in real estate companies is that they are promoter driven, and individual projects are largely developed under specific legal structures or subsidiaries. Mainly because the developer would want to ring fence the risk and rewards attached to a particular project, which leads to each project being quite unique with its own risks and rewards. And one could expect that in the same company, there could be a commercial project, a residential project, and projects across different geographies, which are all running simultaneously. And this kind of calls for different skill sets for execution, and hence the risks are varied too. Now, with such level of uniqueness attached with each project, it is kind of better that they're developed in separate SPVs. However, the other side is that this also leads to a complex group structure. Additionally, it is also common practice to develop projects under joint development agreements in joint ventures or even associate entities, resulting into a sizable exposure to the non-consolidated entities. And such exposures only further complicate the decision towards the approach for consolidation to be made, making a real estate case quite different as compared to any other cross-sector ratings.
Fair enough. Can you discuss the cash flow restrictions which is inherent to this sector?
Right. So, talking about the regulatory restrictions placed by RERA on the cash flows of project, it is mainly in the terms that RERA requires the customer advances which are collected specifically for a project to be used for that particular project only. Now, the regulatory body also mandates that the developer maintain a 70/30 RERA account where 70% is required to be maintained for the purpose of usage towards the project, and only 30% is to be used for any other general corporate purposes. Now, this in essence restricts the fungibility of the cash flows. Similarly, even if we were to consider the lending arrangements in case of a real estate borrower, the lenders typically trap the cash flows of a particular project and use it primarily for their debt servicing, allowing only the surplus to be taken out by the real estate developer, that too towards the end of the project. So while there is no free flow of cash, and therefore looking at the consolidated liquidity and net leverage would give us an incomplete and a rather misleading picture.
Okay. If there are cash flow restrictions, then why take a consolidation approach?
Now, it is actually the strength of the operational, strategic, and legal linkages that would determine the consolidation, as is also laid out in the PSL criteria. The operational and strategic linkages could be in the form of control or management or brand sharing, even relative size of contribution to the group cash flows, and various other factors. While legal linkages are generally established by the presence of corporate guarantees, cross default clauses, or collateralizations, or any other form of credit enhancements between the parent and subsidiaries, or between two subsidiaries, or even between the parent and non consolidated entities. Now, although the free cash flow is kind of restricted, the cash flow fungibility out of the surplus liquidity and brand sharing still call for a consolidated approach, as there is a certain amount of reputational risk involved. And well, real estate is a business of brands. So while it is pertinent in such cases to look at a consolidated liquidity at India Ratings, we do consider the liquidity at project or SPV levels, along with taking a consolidated view as well.
Okay, we've talked about the consolidation approach, but what factor influences the choice between a top-down rating or a bottom-up rating when we are looking at subsidiaries or SPVs?
Right. So, as per the PSL, the parent level ratings are based on a full consolidation approach where we consolidate all the subsidiaries and the non consolidated entities where the linkages are quite strong. But when we are rating subsidiaries or SPVs, we typically tend to take a bottom up approach given the kind of restrictions and conditions placed by RERA as well as the lenders. However, in rare cases, we do take a top-down approach when rating subsidiaries which are a part of groups with high reputation. And when I say high reputation, the indication is more towards those groups which are highly rated and they do demonstrate track records of honoring the credit enhancements provided to their group entities.
The report also talks about comprehensive liquidity analysis. Can you provide more details on this?
Definitely. So the agency generally adopts a comprehensive approach for rating while assessing liquidity on a standalone basis, as well as at the SPV level and on a consolidated basis. What we look at is projects or SPVs with liquidity gaps and evaluate whether there is sufficient leverage or liquidity buffer at the parent or consolidated level to bridge the gap through borrowing of funds. And sometimes we also follow the weak link approach, where the agency may constrain the rating of the parent closer to that of the stressed material SPV if there is no clear plan to fund those liquidity gaps.
Okay. The last question that I have, Kanchi, is given that the related party transactions are inherent to this sector, how does it impact the rating approach?
While it is true that the quantum of related party transactions is quite large in real estate sector, and they could be in the form of land deals or development contracts or joint development contracts or even loans and advances in the balance sheet. And these are more commonly visible in the non-investment grade or the bottom end of the investment grade. Now, depending upon the linkages, the materiality of these transactions, and the availability of information, we may assess the credit profiles of the strongly linked non-consolidated related parties for the rating exercise. Say, for instance, if there's a legal entity within the group that holds a sizable amount of cash, we do assess the linkages between the issuer being rated and the legal entity in question. And if the cash is deemed to be unencumbered, free for distribution, and if there is a track record of cash flow fungibility, only then we tend to assume some kind of a comfort on the cash that is available with the non-consolidated entity as well. Similarly, if we were to consider that there is a JV where there is a strong linkage in the form of brand sharing, investment, and track record of supporting in terms of financing, then in such a scenario, we do consider the debt and cash flows of such an entity, which could be unconsolidated or even just be reported as an investment in the balance sheet.
Thank you, Kanchi. Amay, back to you.
Thanks, Mahaveer and Kanchi, for taking us through this report. It was really insightful. The link to the report is shared along with the podcast. I highly recommend to have a look at it. It's a podcast brought to you by India Ratings and Research, because for opinions on risk and credits, India comes to us.